I'm there.
Hello. I'm going to, she's here. I'm going to start this evening with the collect, hi Ruth, the collect for the feast day of David Pendleton Okerhater. And before you stop and say who, just wait, you'll find out. Oh, yes, he happens to be on the screen. The Lord be with you.
Also here.
Let us pray, O God of unsearchable wisdom and infinite mercy, you chose a captive warrior, David Okerhater, to be your servant, and sent him to be a missionary to his own people, and to exercise the office of a deacon among them. Liberate us, who commemorate him, from bondage to self, and empower us for service to you and to the neighbors you have given us, through Jesus Christ, the captain of our salvation, who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever.
Amen.
Amen. Yes, that is a feast day on our calendar, some long-standing tradition, and often almost completely missed.
Is it okra hater or okra hater?
No such thing as an okra.
2 episodes from American history. The first begins around the 1580s, when Sir Walter Raleigh starts making his first forays into what will become Virginia. And of course, who does he meet but members of the Croatan tribe, who are happy to see him, actually, because they enjoyed curiosities of nature, and Caucasians were certainly curious. Hey, Steve, come on in. Yeah, you have to sit in the first row if you're late.
Hey, Steve.
That's a nice soft chair.
Do you want the comfy chair?
Yeah, good
Take the comfy chair. I'm serious. It's the chair of honor.
I'll get
No,
my
wait.
foot out of the way.
There it
Go to
is.
sleep.
Steve, everybody.
Oh, anyway. So in the 1580s, Sir Walter Raleigh came over and he met with the Croatans, and he met their chief, Manteo, who, turned out to be an interesting fellow. So interesting that Manteo was brought back to England and lived there for a year, and where he was introduced to the court of Queen Elizabeth I and made his rounds. He was brought over to teach as many people in what was going to become the Virginia Company, the language, the general Algonquin language. And of course, Manteo, not being a fool, used the time to learn English. And his English got rather good. And he came back to what's now Virginia, and he spoke to his own tribe and other tribes, and shared some of the knowledge and experiences he had, so that in 1607, we know what happened then, right? The founding of Jamestown Colony, when the colonials to be came over. Hey, come on, don't do this to me. When the colonials to be came over, thank you, to bless the new land, very formally, as you can see, with their chaplain, who was complete with cassock, surplice, and tippet. Tippet is what that black scarf thing. James?
I'm sorry.
Tippet's what that black scarfy thing is. I have one too. I don't ever wear it though. Maybe I'll wear it someday.
It looks like you.
It's the offices.
As I get older, I don't do offices. Yeah. As I get older, he does. They got off the boat at Jamestown Colony, and the soldiers came first, and the longboatmen, of course, got off, and the officers of the ship, and the chaplain, who in his soaking wet at the hem vestments blessed the new land, and someone who had known Manteo, had heard the stories of Manteo, and had learned something from Manteo, came forward, and the first greeting received by the Church of England in the new land was a question from the local tribe member. And the question was,
Did you bring the claret?
Jenny?
She knows the names of all of her students, but you're the one who's trouble.
I forgot what I was going to say.
The first
What he
question.
said.
What was the first
Question
question?
Doesn't matter, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it does.
No, it
He
doesn't
must bring
matter
the
anymore.
claret. It must have been.
No, it was, did you bring any beer?
No.
That was the first question asked of the Jamestown Company upon landing here. Did you bring any beer? Yes. Worth knowing, eh? This is Manteo. Probably not how he was presented to Queen Elizabeth, but who knows? And again, he was chief of the Croatan, but they were a small tribe. In fact, they weren't much more than a clan. What would happen as the greater group would come, and remember, these are all Anglicans, these are all pre-Episcopalians, this is the Church of England. What would happen would be, they would meet this fellow here, Powhatan, who was so called because he was chief of the Powhatan. Chiefs in those days would take on the name of their people. So when you asked them who they were, they would say, I am Powhatan. I am all my people. That's actually a pretty old tradition, and not just in tribal experience, whatever, tribal culture. It used to be the case with, like in the Royal Navy during the Napoleonic era, not just during the Napoleonic era, when a captain was being rowed to a ship or another ship at night, and one of the Marines on board would say, who goes there? The captain would answer not with his name, but the name of his ship. Horatio Hornblower, for example, would say, Lydia.
I am Lydia.
Yeah. Jack Aubrey was even more interesting. He was captain of the Jenny. He was captain of the HMS Surprise. And so in the dark, he would just shout out, surprise. It used to be when attendance was taken, in fact, in the Episcopal Church at conventions, you shouted, when it was taken verbally, you shouted out the name of your parish, not the name of your church.
Kind of confusing with all the Christ churches did it.
No, it's just, you are your parish. So, Bethany and Woodbridge, one would shout. Anyway, Powhatan was chief of what is now called, in history of this culture and era, the Powhatan Empire. Not like the Croatans, small group, almost a cult. No, this was the Powhatan Empire. And he'd already heard of the English, and he was okay with them, and they interacted rather easily, so easily that finally the day came. I should point out that Mateo, when he was in England, was baptized in the Church of England. He became the first American Indian to be baptized, a Christian, and in our tradition, I would add. Powhatan felt so comfortable about the whole thing and found that the Christians, these crazy colonials, actually introduced their Christianity in such a way that he could understand and respect. Then as time came along, Powhatan decided the best thing to do would be what ancient cultures always used to do, bring one of his offspring, his rather comely daughter, into the fold of Christianity. This is his daughter being baptized, the first American Indian to be baptized in what would become the United States, in Virginia. The prototype of all Virginia Episcopalians. Powhatan's daughter was named Pocahontas. We've heard of her, I think, right? Yeah. And I'm guessing
Nice dress.
one of these is John Smith. I don't know. This guy or this guy. Must be this one. So that was a pretty clear union. Now, things would not always go so swimmingly, of course, but that was 1607. That's how the Episcopal Church, in its earliest stage, its earliest incarnation, got established with native culture in the so-called New Land, or what the tribal members called the very old land. But it started out well. Shall we skip ahead 250 years, approximately, to Boxing Day 1862. There was something that was called the Dakota Uprising. You know what else was going on in 1862? Not in the Dakotas, right? Yeah, the Civil War, which was attracting a lot of attention, and all of it, you know, into the mid-Atlantic, north and southern states. And so the government representatives in the Dakotas and the soldiers in the Dakotas tended to be of a rather poor quality. And what was happening was the money that was being made available for the local reservation wasn't making it to the local reservation. The clothing, the winter clothing in particular, wasn't making it to the local reservation. Actually, nothing was making it to the local reservation. And to quote Bob Marley, the reggae musician, a hungry mob is an angry mob. They got hungry, they rose up, they stole some food, they killed about 80 settlers or so and suffered some losses themselves. They were, and we'll get to the circumstances behind it too, because that also involves the Episcopal Church in two completely different ways. But what happened was they were rounded up by the soldiers at the ironically named Fort Sheridan. We'll talk about why that's ironic. The ironically named Fort Sheridan. And, well, that's the story. The Episcopal Church had to intervene. We'll get to that as well as this unfolds. So the Episcopal Church, in its fledgling incarnation as the Church of England and the colonies, began the process of baptizing and making new members among the native cultures. In 1862, we tried to save lives and did up to a point, but didn't completely. One of the things that might be helpful for us to remember, though, is that, well, when did American Indians gain the right to vote?
Probably later than women, I don't know.
Yeah, later in women, yeah. 1924. Indians couldn't vote when my parents were born. That's how relatively new it is. Indians could not be citizens. Indians could not travel across state lines without government permission within the lifetime of people whom we've known and loved.
They cared about state lines.
Who is the great emancipator if you're an American Indian? Oh, God, it's not Abraham Lincoln, as you will see. Not even close. Close. Calvin Coolidge. Perhaps you've seen the photo. There's one when Calvin Coolidge is president when he's named Great White Father of the Nation, where he's wearing a very elaborate chief's feather headdress. That was given to him not as one of those dumb gifts you give a president because, you know, politicians like to receive them, but because he gave the right to vote to the American Indians. He is regarded as the great emancipator. But that's how late then American Indians came into citizenship, into voting rights, into freedom to travel, and into a bunch of other things, as we'll see. And in part enabled by the church, but in greater part just enabled by Calvin Coolidge, who historically is starting to look like a better and better president all the time. All the time. All righty.
Who would have thought?
Yeah, not me. Silent Cal. When he had something to say, it was pretty good. All righty. Don't let the portrait fool you. This guy was a man of action. For one thing, he visited when he was a bishop, he visited every single one of his parishes annually. We have 2 bishops who have cars, and they're relatively small Connecticut, and we see them every 3 years. And yeah, you can record that.
We're looking forward to the visit.
This guy lived at a time when there were no paved roads, when you had to ride a horse or a horse-drawn conveyance of some sort, and considering he was a bishop of New York, travel through some pretty rough weather upstate. This is John Henry Hobart. And without him, there would maybe not be an Episcopal church in the United States.
Makes a great dishwasher, too.
And his family makes good, yes, still around, still Episcopalians. Still won't let us buy those dishwashers at discount, but anyway. John Henry Hobart, born in 1775 and lived to 1830. Not a great long life, but he probably died of exhaustion. I mean, he really did wreck his body. He was as committed to his people as anyone I've ever heard of, and it doesn't matter. He was well born. He was a member of, most of the people we're going to hear about in the early days of the Episcopal Church in the frontier were well-born Caucasians. That was clergy at that time tended to be from families with some sort of property. And certainly that was the case with Hobart. But it didn't matter. He didn't just hang out with his own. Everybody was one of his flock. Even those who weren't white. Even those who lived in the middle of nowhere. John Henry Hobart, all right. He founded the first seminary of the Episcopal Church. That's a more recent drawing. That's from the 1980s. That's the General Theological Seminary built on the estate of Clement Clark Moore. Does that name ring a bell? It was the night before Christmas. Yeah, Episcopal priest, by the way. If you go to New York, this is West 21st, West 20th, 9th Avenue, 10th Avenue. He began the building of this. This was the eldest and original building once upon a time. It does not look like this anymore. This is the way it looked when Jenny and I went there, though. You see the chapel, obviously in the middle. This close used to be sort of wonderful. It was a nice monastic thing. And sometimes when you're really working on all of your scholarly stuff, you'd spend sometimes 2 weeks and forget you're in the middle of Manhattan. This building's gone. It's now a high-rise condo. This building where I lived is gone. It's now a boutique hotel. This building, which housed married students, and right over here where you can't see it, was the townhouse where Jack Kerouac wrote On the Road. That's all now been turned into really expensive apartments. In fact, this building that held, I forget how many different apartments, now holds 6 apartments per building. So, yeah. And big apartments in New York are big price tags.
So which one was his house?
Oh, well, in his days, it would have been this. In our day, the dean lived here. Clement Clark Moore's house would have been on this plot of land. This would have been the footprint for it. That building was subsequent to it. And of course, when Moore was alive, this was rural New York. So this was his farm. Hobart turned it into the first seminary of the Episcopal Church, and virtually every significant church person, well, I should say church man, came through there because it was the only place to be educated that wasn't in England. So Hobart built that, enabling the education of clergy. Hobart built this out in the wild frontier. In his day, it was named Geneva College. After his death, it was named after him. This is Hobart College, now Hobart and William Smith. I remember that. Is that where Amanda graduated from?
Yep.
That long?
Yeah.
Oh my God, that was a hot day. All right, Hobart and William Smith College. But then, built on the frontier in Hobart's day, smack dab in the middle of the state, in Oneida Territory. Which meant, the way Hobart looked at things, all right, well, these Indians here in the Oneida Territories are my flock as well. And so he created missionaries that served with them and took the gospel to them and made sure they had schools and made sure they had clinics and made sure they had all sorts of things. And as westward expansion, it's so funny to think of this as the frontier, isn't it? You can see all the other tribes. They're still there, by the way. They have a big casino. Big. As westward expansion was starting to wreck this, and Hobart could not do anything to stop that, it'd be like holding back the ocean. He negotiated with the government for the Oneida to be moved out to Wisconsin, what's now Wisconsin, what was then Indian Territory. That was negotiated, though, by the Bishop of New York with the U.S. government.
Did they want to go?
Yeah, they wanted to get out of there. Their hunting grounds were getting destroyed. They're being turned into farms. And, you know, there were borders now, and there were authorities, and as anybody who's trying to put together this Chili Fest knows, there were regulations, you know, there's all of that. And that just wasn't anything, if you don't have to live that way, don't. I know a guy who lives in Bethlehem, Connecticut. You know why? Because he wants to live in Bethlehem, Connecticut, because why was?
No zoning.
Yeah, I think it's the only community in Bethlehem.
It was on a referendum this past election and voted down again.
Of course it did. For so many people, including the nuns, including the nun who was in the Elvis Presley movies, don't want it. Right. So, yeah, no, he moved them. It was the first, it gave an idea to the government about moving tribes, though. That was one of the unfortunate side effects. But Hobart took responsibility for them and made sure they had proper security, proper food, proper transportation, proper clothing, proper everything. That was a big help. This is sort of what Oneida and other tribal villages look like in New York State, and then going down as far as North Carolina too. Combination of traditional teepee-like structures and what we would see as our normal-looking little houses, little lodges. Built by them, by the way. The tribes had a remarkably sophisticated network for trading. They had their own highway system, for example. Ever been to Chillicothe, Ohio? Well, you're not missing anything. But once upon a time, that was the crossroads marketplace for all the tribes that lived in what's now Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, you know, what have you. Everyone from the Mohawk to the Pontiac's bunch to the Shawnee and the Pawnee and the Lenni Lenape and the Delaware, they were kind of the same. Anyway, they all met there, and Chillicothe, Ohio is named from the Indian word Chillicote, which is the marketplace language. It was the Esperanto of the tribes. There was a common language they could use in the marketplace. So, you know, we're not talking about brutal, unsophisticated people. It's just they're not sophisticated in the same way that a European would necessarily recognize. And I'm glad people like Hobart sort of saw that and enabled that to be realized and honored up to a point. But of course, Hobart only lives till 1830. His work in the church kills him. But he began.
Is that a fence? Excuse me.
Oh, it's probably,
Also-
yeah, it's a fort.
Yeah.
It's a fort structure, yeah. Yeah, they did that too. Yeah. Usually it was just logs stuck in the ground and waddled together. But still, they're not designed necessarily to keep the enemy out, just slow them down long enough that you can kill them. take sight. You know? All right. So, next. That's what clergy wore. Look at that. What an outfit. This is James Lloyd Breck. He was the proto-missionary of the Episcopal Church in the United States. Born in 1818, lived until 1876, graduated from the General Theological Seminary, and committed his entire life to planting, there we go, that's the word, churches and schools and 2 seminaries that were also colleges back in those days, out in the wild frontier of what's now Michigan and Wisconsin. Without him, now here's 2 of his converts. One of them we'll talk about shortly. Both these fellows became subdeacons until permission was received from the Episcopal Church headquarters, in those days in Philadelphia, to enable them to be ordained. One did not make it to ordination, the other one did, and his story gets kind of interesting as well. This is, I mean, the very idea, this is maybe one of the most symbolic gestures ever. Like, here are my guys, I'm shaking his hand, he's not quite sure, but okay, whatever. Especially since I had to sit there for about 15 minutes until the photograph was taken.
Right.
But that was part of the early work done. And again, no one else was doing this at this time. The Episcopal Church was that which was reaching out to this group. He founded this place. It's called the Shoda House. It's a seminary of the Episcopal Church, still in existence. This was its first formal structure. Originally it was also a college, and it was also a kind of upper high school. It was a center of education, anyway. Still around, and still a rather handsome place, don't you think? Yeah, more of it left than in my seminary. And he also built this, which was once upon a time Seabury Seminary, then became Seabury Western Theological Seminary, and now is Bexley Seabury Theological School. Doesn't matter, they don't own the buildings anymore. They rent space at the Lutheran Seminary across the street. This is in Evanston, Illinois, as you can see from the postcard. So 2 seminaries and a lot of outreach to the tribal populations. It was a nice little seminary. I had a friend that went there. Used to visit them. Pleasant little place. Oh. You ever driven through Middletown, going east to west? You intersect with Main Street on, what is it, State Route 66? Okay. And you go right to 9?
6 and 9.
Right.
All right, when you get that traffic light, on the corner that would be on your right if you're facing east, there's a house. If you are ever there, look at the plaque. That's Breck House. This is James Lloyd Breck. Or James, excuse me, that's DeCoven House. This is James DeCoven, who was born in that house. And was also, as you can tell from his collar, an Episcopal priest, born in 1831, lived till 1879. He's our connection to all of this that's going on, because he was very much a Diocese of Connecticut fellow. And by the way, remember, the Diocese of Connecticut is the oldest one in the Episcopal Church, so really we've seen it all. We've benefited from slavery, mainly through Yale Divinity School, and we have benefited in a different way from our relations with the American Indian tribes. Yeah, James DeCoven, he discovered something that the rest, well, Breck had discovered it too, but DeCoven really turned it into an art form. Where do I start? Before Christ Church Cathedral in Hartford was a cathedral, it was just Christ Church. He was the rector there, but he really pined, just for a year, he pined to go out west. And as you can tell, he was from, the elite class in America. He had inherited money. He had an education. He had, like all Episcopal clergy, the affectation of glasses, even when you don't need them. And he became what nowadays we would call a bundler. He went to the existing parishes and asked for donations to create a college out in the wild frontier that would educate settlers and the tribal population too. And so that was what he did. He gathered that together. Oh, you want to guess where he graduated from seminary? Yes, General Theological Seminary. Went out, became a professor at the Shoda House. That was one of his first things. And founded Racine College, which was a pretty good place in his day, don't you think? And that was, again, in the middle of nowhere in Wisconsin. He probably should have retired. He was offered many jobs. He was offered, let me see, I had to make a list. Because, yes, he was elected Bishop of Massachusetts. He was elected Bishop of Illinois. He was elected Bishop of Wisconsin. He was elected Bishop of Fond du Lac. If you don't know what Fond du Lac is, it's one of our tiny little peculiar dioceses of the Episcopal Church. There's two up there in Wisconsin. There's Fond du Lac and Eau Claire. I don't know if they're still around. They were so tiny. Anyway, he got elected bishop in all four places and never became bishop of any of them because the House of Bishops would not ratify the elections.
Because?
He did something almost unforgivable. Moral turpitude? Nah. Was he a drunkard? Nah. Did he attempt to redefine the paradigm of relations with one's congregations? Nah. He was a high churchman.
Ooh, very big.
He chanted the liturgy. He did the elevations. Have you ever seen one of those clowns behind the altar take the top and hold it up and do all this and all? He did all that stuff. He was a high churchman. It was an era where the high church practices were being reintegrated, which had been pretty well excised back during Church of England days. Actually, earliest Church of England, it was part of what was excised when we broke away from the Church of Rome. Henry VIII punished some people rather harshly. Well, rather Henry VIII style. Yeah. Well, I always liked the abbot who was drawn and quartered and had his limbs suspended on the gateway to his monastery. Yeah.
Does send a message.
Yeah. I'm rethinking this, Your Majesty. Yeah, he was a high churchman, and that was just not done, but it's being reintroduced in England. It's being introduced in the United States. But the thing that he found particularly viable about it is the tribes responded to it. Because one, it was nonverbal, and two, when you see somebody doing the elevations, when you see them actually taking care of all that stuff, it means when they tell you it's important, they find it important. They make it important. They revere that which is sacramental. And so he continued to do that. Elected bishop 4 times, denied the office 4 times. He was offered, rector of Trinity Wall Street. He was offered Church of the Advent in Boston. And he was offered something else, I forget which one now, but large, well-established historic parish in the United States. Turned them all down. Kind of wish he hadn't, actually. To stay at Racine College and teach and continue to organize and bundle donations to create viable civilization and the presence of the church among the American Indian people. The reason I say I wish he had kind of moved east is he was walking across campus one day, slipped on the ice and fractured his skull. Yeah. And that was the end of him. James Sokoven, though. So next time I drive by that house, there's a lot of history there.
I think it's owned by the Rockwall Foundation now.
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah, I used to have meetings there.
Oh, yeah. What's it like on the inside?
Well, we just, had this one meeting room that we were in all the time. It looked like it had been like a living room or something.
Yeah. His family were, commercial shipping.
Yeah.
So that was an ideal place for them.
Yeah, it's nice.
On the tidal river.
My diaconal ordination is feast.
That's right. Smack dab in the middle of Lent. This is a lesser example. We've seen leading lights now. We've seen DeKoven, we've seen Breck, we've seen Hobart, whom we worship. Well, we don't, but this is someone you've never heard of. This is Eleazar Williams, who lived from 1788 to 1858. But what makes him interesting is he came from, let's say a mixed racial heritage, all right? Also, sometimes I guess we could describe a heritage not burdened with formal marriage in some cases, which made him always a little suspect in the church. Yeah, but that's okay. He was of Mohawk ancestry on his Indian side, and he was married to a woman from the Menominee tribe, which is, the Minnesota area. But Hobart, John Henry Hobart, appointed him the missionary, ordained him a deacon, and appointed him the missionary deacon to the Oneida. This was the fellow who went with the tribe from New York to Wisconsin. This is his official New York portrait. This is what he looked like.
What was left?
Every day.
Yeah, but you see he's wearing his stole, his deacon's stole. If you don't know, deacons wear it, just off the shoulder. Priests wear it, over the shoulder. Bishops wear it sort of loosely flung. Anyway, the one great thing that he did, besides sort of setting this the standard for being a character on the frontier, was that he translated the Book of Common Prayer into Iroquois. That was the first time the prayer book had been translated into one of the native languages, and he took care of that. At the end of his life, he was probably suffering from dementia or just boredom, and declared himself the lost Dauphin of the Crown of France. And then exhausted what money he had attempting to reclaim his throne.
In Wisconsin.
From Wisconsin. He died, and for a while, until it was destroyed by nature, his headstone read, King in absentia. But without him, no prayer book for some of the tribes. This is sort of what a church service looked like. And see, this is a local preaching translator or translating preacher or something like that. You see the chief, right? You see this guy, probably the shaman, not too thrilled, but whatever. Everybody listening intently. You'll notice though, they're in their Sunday best, aren't they? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, really, we got the feathers out, which they didn't wear every day. We get the paint on, which is always for celebration or killing, which is a whole other story. And we listen intently as the story is told, and I would draw your attention to what did 19th century, mid to early 19th century Episcopal Church preachers, say in Boston or Philadelphia or New York, look like while they were preaching, while they were up in the pulpit with their paper. Look what he's introducing. Is he using a script? Is he in a pulpit? Is he gesticulating? Is he moving? Oh. A whole different way of doing it. You don't see that very often. Even today. Important part of what Episcopal preaching is about, though, is that motion and that engagement of audience, however it's known, congregation or whatever group is listening to. All right.
So is he the translator guy, or?
Yeah, he's probably a lay preacher. He would listen to the bishop or whatever missionary clergy person it was, who'd have them all in for a fairly formal mass and internalize what was told, and then go out and spread the word in a way that was more florid and understood a greater reception from the native audience. Here we go. This is a great man. This is Henry Whipple when he was a priest. He would eventually become bishop of Minnesota, not Wisconsin. Bishop of Minnesota. He did something absolutely remarkable. Remember I told you about Boxing Day 1862? The Dakota Uprising, it's sometimes called, or the Dakota Revolt, or the Dakota Rebellion. It's never called the guys at the fort ripped us off, retribution, or anything like that. It's always 303 members of the Sioux tribe were captured, and Abraham Lincoln, the great emancipator, signed their death warrant to be all of them hanged by the neck until they are dead simultaneously, or as simultaneously as they had timber to permit the construction of a gallows. That's why Abraham Lincoln is not revered in Native culture in the United States. Henry Whipple was appalled. He was now, by this time, bishop. He was absolutely appalled. He was also fluent in the Sioux languages and well regarded by them, and he regarded them well, too. And so Whipple, being connected in the East, went and wrote furiously to Abraham Lincoln. That's interesting. Wrote furiously to Abraham Lincoln, please do not let this happen. These were circumstances, they don't need to do this. And we don't have to make a great show of executing 303 men a couple of whom were as young as 14 years old. Lincoln made a deal with them. Well, Lincoln said, okay, this is what I'll do. We'll only execute 30 of them. I think it was 38.
That's like the burgers of
Yeah.
LA.
Yeah, yeah.
So here they are, aged 14 to 68, and they built that thing so they could be simultaneously executed. Whipple was appalled, and it lived with him the rest of his life. The local, I was looking for this, the copy of the newspaper. I've read it, it's remarkable. I think it's the Mankato, whatever, Times, said on their way to the gallows, they sang their heathen song. Do you want to hear the music to their heathen song? Hum dum 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 da da dum dum da da da. They were, all except two of them were Episcopalians, baptized Episcopalians. Two of them were Methodists, so yeah. No, two of them were Methodists, the remainder were Episcopalians. Their heathen song was Onward Christian Soldiers that they sung on the way to the gallows in their native language. Their heathen song. God almighty. So, thanks, Abe. Yeah, at least he saved 200 and something. Whipple did what he could. Whipple would have an interesting life, though. It made him an absolute fire-breathing advocate for the tribes, as you can understand. And it did not alienate him from Eastern establishment culture either, because when the Battle of the Little Bighorn was fought, which was an absolute disaster for the U.S. Army, there had to be a congressional, that is a government commission, set up to analyze what the heck happened. Whipple was chosen to chair the commission that examined what happened, the official government commission that examined what happened at Little Bighorn. And as you can imagine, he did it fairly. That's one of the reasons Custer isn't blindly seen as the great hero. He was also remarkably abusive and much more interested in his own good press than he was in the lives of people that weren't hurting him, or the United States. All right, that was Whipple, though. Good for him. Not recognized in history, though. There is no feast day of Henry Whipple. There is nothing. There is a group in the church working through the Office of Indigenous Ministries at the Episcopal Church Center that's trying to get a feast day for the martyrs of Mankato. Which would seem okay, except, it's still touchy to this day. I mean, for example, we're doing this racial awareness thing. Are we mentioning American Indians at all? Are we mentioning Asian Episcopalians or Asian American Episcopalians at all? No, it's still just about really two races. Oh, here's another.
Thank you.
Here's a Getty Images, God bless you, Eric, of the scene. And of course, being there, people cheered it on, people brought picnic lunches, people watched what was happening. Poor Whipple. Decent man, tried to do the right thing. Saved a few. Oh, just in case you're wondering if orders of service are a brand new thing in the Episcopal Church, this is actually the order of service from Whipple's funeral. You can see, 1901. And they did them on Sundays in those days. So they had Holy Communion at 9, Holy Communion at 10, well, it's been first Sunday of the month, at 10:45, and then from 11:30 to 1:30, body lying in state, and then finally the burial office. Good Lord, that's a long day for the clergy.
It's a good annual meeting.
The quit spreading that rumor, that's what. The body placed in its last earthly resting place beneath the altar of the Cathedral of Our Merciful Savior in Faribault, Minnesota. It's since been moved, but that's what it was originally. Alrighty. Oh, here's an interesting fellow. Yeah, so interesting, I forgot his name. Oh yeah, Joseph Alexander Gilfillian of Minnesota, 1838 to 1913. Graduated from, yes, the General Theological Seminary. And I only leave him because he was a missionary to the Ojibwe Indian tribe, or rather the Ojibwe tribe, and he translated the Book of Common Prayer into Ojibwe. So another large group introduced to Anglican spirituality. Here's a
Did they
fellow.
have written language, though? They
yeah.
just sounded out? Or?
No, they had sort of a pictogram kind of thing, but they had it was written to be read. It was like early Aramaic, They did have an alphabet, though.
As the Iroquois did. I mean, the Oneida, they were part of the Iroquois nation.
Yeah, they had, oh yeah, the Six Nations had quite an elaborate, almost Chinese-like alphabet. This is Sam Hinman. Now, who was it? It was De Koven, who bundled money from other places, of course, but also Christ Church of Bethany and Woodbridge. This is Sam Hinman, who graduated not from the General Theological Seminary, but from Seabury Western Theological Seminary. However, what makes him particularly interesting for our study today, he's a graduate of Cheshire Academy. He grew up in Cheshire. He was sponsored by the Collection of Cheshire Area Episcopal Churches, including one you're familiar with. We and others sent him out west. Sam Hinman, his years were 1839 to 1890, sent him out west where he translated the prayer book into the Dakota language. So those of you who went out to Rosebud, the first text that those tribes received was that was translated by him, who's actually from here, from Cheshire. Interesting, huh? Now, Hinman was one, if you were in church on Sunday, I did mention him. He did something virtually unthinkable. He cohabitated with a native woman and was temporarily defrocked in punishment. It was said that that she was a prostitute, and he stole government money to pay her. She was, in fact, his wife, but the marriage could not be recognized because the Episcopal Church at that time did not recognize mixed marriages. So they were married in a tribal ceremony, but they were husband and wife. And the money he stole was not to give to his wife because she wasn't a prostitute. The money he stole, and he did steal it, he freely acknowledged it, was the money that the local government representatives weren't giving to the tribe. He got tired of the tribe, watching the tribe starve, and these guys from out in Washington gambling with the money that was supposed to go to the tribes. So in the middle of the night, Jesse James style, he and a few others stole the money and distributed it to the shopkeepers who were keeping the books for the tribe. So the tribe could actually get something. So those who were angry with him for stealing their gambling money, their free gambling money, labeled him as a whoremonger, and thus he was suspended from holy orders for a time. But that was the good news, because sometimes I thought about this with some of the people I knew in seminary who didn't make it through the process, but what they did otherwise was kind of interesting. There were some interesting people, and they did interesting things. Remember Chuck Jones went and was one of the founding members of the Manhattan AIDS Project. This is a fellow we were in seminary with who was not allowed to be ordained because he was openly gay. Those are the days, folks. Actually, the church has come along in fits and starts about certain things. It's remarkable how intolerant. I mean, my dad had to convert from Methodism to the Episcopal Church so that he and my mother could be married, because only Episcopalians can marry Episcopalians. And that was early 1950s. All right, so Hinman went to work for, you ready? The Bureau of Indian Affairs. Perfect. The one time maybe in human history where the BIA was actually a just organization. And he made sure that everything worked as it should, and the Indians were taken care of. And after a time, he was actually readmitted to holy orders. But by then it was kind of redundant, because he was doing the work of the gospel through a government agency. Words I never thought I'd say. Here he is. He's third from left there, posing. Right? Matthew Brady took this photograph, by the way. Here he is working with...
The resolution is so good.
Yeah, isn't it handsome? Yeah, he used that expensive silver phosphate stuff, yeah. Anyway, everybody, again, having to stand. See, tribe members just don't get the handshake, really. Okay, what do we do? I don't know.
They actually still don't.
Yeah.
If you go out there,
It's not
they tell you not to squeeze their hand because it's a sign of our dominance over them.
Right.
So they hand you,
It's wet with the
they give you the hand,
Yeah,
your
just
wet.
hand, it's the fish thing. You don't squeeze. And you also don't look each other in the eye when you're shaking hands
Yeah, you might steal each other's, I don't know, whatever.
out there.
When you first meet.
It's remarkable, isn't it? William Hobart Hare, descendant of Henry Hobart. he was bishop of the missionary district of Niobrara. I think I mispronounced that.
Niobrara River.
Right.
And there
Which
were
includes Rosebud.
Yeah.
It's a diocese that doesn't exist anymore. But he was the bishop of it when it was a missionary diocese. He baptized and confirmed over 7,000 tribes members, personally. So,
That's here.
That's Bishop Hare?
yeah, that's him.
That's the Bishop Hare Center is what
Right,
went out.
William Hobart Hare. He's known as the Apostle of the West. Yeah, it was a huge
Had the
deal.
Niobrara convocation every,
See what he died. Died in 1909. Yeah, they still have the annual convocation, right, and it's named for that old district. All right, well, now, I've shown you a lot of white people, I know, but that's how it starts, you know? We'll just take a break here, I'm not sure who this is. I think this is,
We're on the plains.
we're on the plains, I think this is Bishop Hare in his younger days. We're checking on his flock, and that was the conveyance made available to him by his diocese, which actually looks kind of handsome. All right.
I was close.
Remember this photo from earlier?
Yeah.
All right. The fellow on the left, I mispronounce his name all the time. His name is Enmegabo. Enmegabo. He's Ojibwe. He was an Ojibwe shaman. He was the first American Indian to be ordained an Episcopal priest in 1867. Just 5 years after Episcopalians were being slaughtered. He was in Minnesota as well. He was part of that group on the reservation that was involved in, it was one of the Mankato, in the Mankato martyrdom. That's part of the issue with him. And Megabo means he that prays while standing. He began his adulthood being trained by his shaman grandfather to be the tribal shaman. And he was noted for being particularly spiritual because he was the youngest shaman they had ever enjoyed. And when Christianity came, he saw the natural kind of nexus between the faiths, and it was whoever it was, well, we know who it was. Who's that again? James Lloyd Breck, yeah. However it was, Breck explained it to him. It made perfect sense, and he translated easily from tribal religion into frontier Episcopalianism. In 1862, he caught wind of the fact that some of his brothers of the tribe were going to stage a revolution and try to seize food and anything else, blankets, anything else they could get. And he was torn. Do I support my brothers in the tribe, or do I support the cause of justice and try to prevent unnecessary deaths? So when he heard of those who would become the Mankato martyrs going on the literal war path, no, not a figurative thing, he went to Fort Sheridan and tattled in an attempt to stop it.
Whistleblower, huh?
Yeah, except those to whom he blew the whistle could have just stopped it, but instead they were bored. It was the frontier. It was a chance to slaughter some Indians.
Here's some Indian guy coming.
Yeah, good. And so some in that community still regard him as kind of a Judas figure for this. I mean, when you come down to it, between he and Whipple, and you know, and obviously there's a direct link there from Breck to Whipple. Here he is in his vestments. He still managed to save all but 30-some. He did what he could. I can't imagine, I mean, imagine the ethical dilemma in that. And imagine all the cultural collision that would occur. To whom am I loyal? And so he decided to be loyal, essentially, to Jesus and try to make peace. That's why there's no feast day. Oh, yeah, there is now. There wasn't a feast day for Megabo until 10 years ago?
Maybe less than that.
Maybe more recent.
So not for Whipple, but there is for.
Yeah. Well, he is the first ordained priest, American Indian. So, and, you know, was important in the Ojibwe tribe up to a point. The rest of his days were marked with controversy, though, and he was never entirely trusted. It's kind of the terrible stories that come out of history. Here's his icon, though. That's what's interesting. He's got the peace pipe, which is, good God, how cliche is that? And he has the fire in his hand, which must have come from one of his sermons. Instead of the preaching tabs, you'll notice he has what I guess is sometimes called a bolo tie, sort of a string tie. And that really cool stole or tippet, I don't know what it is. I want one. But there we
That's
go.
embroidery.
That's very nice, yeah. I doubt he had anything that nice, but nevertheless, there he is on him. And so he is recognized by the church, but it's always a little tricky. Okay. Yes. Here's four fellows. And here, yes, please stop. All right. I don't know the names of numbers 1, 3, and 4. This is David Pendleton Okerhater, a captain of the Cheyenne tribe, a mighty warrior who was part of the Cheyenne uprising. He was born in 1847, lived to 1931. He was captured, as were these other fellows and a few hundred others, and they were captured in Oklahoma, and they were taken to a prisoner of war facility for American Indian warriors in, you know, the Geneva Conventions say that you have to imprison somebody in a climate like the one from which they come, which is why Italians were housed in Arizona during the Second World War. It's a little interesting. A little factoid there from history. Yeah, well, there was no Geneva Convention in the 19th century, so they were sent to St. Augustine, Florida. Hot, humid, Lord knows what else, packed onto a train. Most of them had never even seen a train, and here they were being loaded into the belly of this thing. And off they were sent to, what's the name of that fort? Fort San Marcos. San Marcos. It's still down there. It's a historic site. Yeah, that's where they were sent. They went down there. General Sheridan, which is why it's ironic about Fort Sheridan and all that. General Sheridan was the general in charge of that district. He looked at his budget and saw how much it was going to cost to keep these prisoners fed and in some relative condition of health. This is post-Andersonville, so they were a little touchy about some of these things, and they weren't quite sure what to do, and Sheridan came up with a brilliant plan. You've heard this before. Kill them all.
Yeah, I was gonna say that.
Yeah, execute them. You don't have to feed dead people. The captain, the Caucasian captain in charge of the fort, in charge of the POW camp, as it were, a Captain Pratt, was a practicing Christian and thought about what it would be like for him to do a mass execution, to either build a massive Abraham Lincoln Memorial Gallows or some sort of firing squad. The funny thing about firing squads is, this was true even of the Nazis, interestingly. After a while, they start having some problems with killing so many people so often, and so you have to keep rotating the members of the firing squad. It's not a good thing. Pratt didn't see any reason, who had been on the train with these fellows, who had been with them the whole time, who had seen them organize, seen them be humane to one another, and they were well-behaved prisoners. They had a certain order and respect and intelligence, and so he put together a bold plan, and he said to the general, look, I could turn these guys into trustees, and if we wanted, at some point, they could become some sort of native battalion. Well, smaller than that, really. Native company in the U.S. Army. Now, Sheridan didn't believe it, but he said, if you can get these guys to self-regulate, then we'll see what we can do. And so he did. And he made 4 trustees, and you'll see they were given uniforms. You see they look like Union uniforms, minus any kind of decoration, right?
Except it looks like there's stripes on their behaviors.
There is, because Okerhater was named the first American Indian brevet first sergeant of the U.S. Army. Do you know what a brevet officer or non-com is? Okay. Well, for example, I mentioned before, what's that?
It's part of the battle, it's not the normal course of.
Usually not, yeah. Usually there's extraordinary
It's just
circumstances.
administrative grant.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, there are a lot of brevet because of the slaughter. There are a lot of brevet officers trained in the American Civil War. Well, for example, Custer was a second lieutenant. And barely that, because he had actually left West Point early because the Civil War had started. He and his roommate, Sheridan, had left early, but he was given a commission, a brevet commission as a second lieutenant. By the end of the war, he was a brevet brigadier general. Yeah. It means you have the rank, you don't get paid for it. Yeah, so Okerhater was made brevet first sergeant of San Marcos.
In wool, yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I know. Can you imagine? Oh, God. And the shirts underneath are wool. You know, I mean, it was around this time they started using mattress ticking for the shirts, just because, you know. But yeah. So Ochre, these fellows were the trustees before they disappeared into history. These fellows were These fellows were the trustees of the prisoner of war camp. Ochre Hader proved to be a competent sergeant. More than that, he was intelligent. He was well spoken. He learned English very well. He learned Caucasian customs very well, and he also learned what it is to be very polite to the woman from the Episcopal Church Women's Auxiliary who came to ensure the prisoners had books and were taken care of.
ECW.
Well, that's what they've become, yeah. The Women's Auxiliary.
Bright man.
Yeah. Well, not only that, but the head of the Women's Auxiliary for the fort was Mrs. Pendleton, whose husband was Senator Pendleton. They adopted David Ochre Hader. Actually, his baptismal name, the Pendletons were Episcopalians, as was Pratt. He was baptized in the Episcopal Church, took the name of David, and took the middle name of Pendleton, but kept the gloriously mispronounced tribal name. It became Ochre Hader, and has remained such through the years. He became the first prominent, even though he was not the first to be ordained, he became the first prominent American Indian clergy person, and was sent back to Oklahoma to his own tribe to preach the gospel. I've got this glorious, he's also the first American Indian to be included in lesser feasts and fasts, and his own feast day, and of course we heard the comment at the beginning of this. He said this is one of the great quotations of the Episcopal Church. This is from a sermon upon his return to his tribe. They send him off as a captain, a warrior captain and prisoner of war. He comes back dressed like this as an ordained member of the Episcopal Church, but all right, why not? He said to his tribe, quoting now, "You all know me. You remember when I led you out to war, I went first, and what I told you was true. Now I've been away to the east, and I've learned about another captain, the Lord Jesus Christ, and he is my leader. He goes first, and all he tells me is true. I come back to my people to tell you to go with me now in this new road, a war that makes peace for all."
Amen.
Nice, huh? That's an eloquent man. And so that's why he is revered more than any others at this point, even to the extent of the cathedral, the Episcopal Cathedral in Oklahoma City, about 24 years ago, lost all of its stained glass windows. Remember when the office building was bombed? Yeah, the cathedral's on the same block. No one was injured at the cathedral, and I don't think there's any physical damage to the cathedral other than when her stained glass windows were blown out. But they were replaced, and they renamed the chapel the David Pendleton Ochre Hader Chapel. There is also the site of where all of this started, which was in central New York at Grace Church in Syracuse. There is this glorious stained glass window. Ochre Hader, the warrior captain, David Pendleton Ochre Hader, deacon in the Episcopal Church. Oh, that's nice. You can go to Syracuse and see that. It's a very handsome window. Yeah, I could have done better on the face, but anyway. And there's a gathering there every year, too, of members of the Office of Indigenous Ministries that has its headquarters in, of course, New York City, and organizes all these things on behalf of the indigenous members of the Episcopal Church, who are virtually invisible sometimes, except, when you've been out there and you see what a strong presence the church has and Christianity has. I can't forget these ladies.
The ECW.
Yeah, the Women's Auxiliary. Some of the bishops actually would ordain, not ordain, they would lay hands on these women. Boy, that doesn't sound right. Like one does a confirmation, and name them as sub-deacons. So the Women's Auxiliary had an order of deaconesses, they were called, but they weren't really, that's actually used to be one of the orders.
I know, it
Yeah.
just has that sound.
It's still present in the Eastern Orthodox churches.
Shocking.
In fact, a fellow I know, Bill Razor, no longer an Episcopal priest, but when he was in seminary, he went to see a friend ordained a subdeacon in the Syrian Orthodox Church in New York City, and apparently the bishop was having a little Elians what's his name? Imagined himself to be Dauphin of France, I think. Anyway, the bishop kind of got away from the acolytes at one point and wound up accidentally ordaining my acquaintance Bill a subdeacon in the Syrian. It's a wonderful story. And then he wandered around kissing the icons for a while until they finally got a lasso on the guy. Anyway, these are the women that brought. We can't ignore what they added. They're older now, but imagine this bunch when they were younger and just full of beans. And married sometimes to clergy, married to shopkeepers, and they came out and they made sure that churches were built, that worship wasn't out in the open air or in a barn or something. Churches were built, and that primary and lower secondary schools were built as well. Mm-hmm. So without them, no civilization. Of course, some of them unfortunately also undertook the program whereby one believes that the best way to educate an Indian is to turn them into a white person. So that was an unfortunate side effect of it, but there were schools. You teach people how to read and write, you give them the word, and they can make up their own minds about that stuff.
Amen.
See that little...
Four corners.
Yeah, well, 3 of the 4 corners.
Yeah.
3
How
corner
come
corners.
Colorado's not there? Is that
Because,
Colorado?
yeah,
or
because
is
the
that-
Diocese of Colorado is adamant about its diocesan borders. This is up until last year, this was the Diocese of Navajo Land. Still one of the dioceses of the Episcopal Church. They changed their name, as did we, from diocese to Episcopal Church in Navajo Land. Of course, we're now the Episcopal Church in Connecticut until, turn off the sound, until Bishop Douglas retires, and then go back to being the diocese. No, I'm just kidding, Doug. Ian,
It's not like putting on your pen badge.
whatever your name is. I'm a joker, Ian. Anyway, we still have the Diocese of Navajo Land. It's the poorest diocese in the Episcopal Church. And yet it is greatly favored by a lot of missionary activity, which we are invited to partake in from time to time, including the building of hogans and other things like that. And their, what do we have? Oh, this is their symbol. Right, that's the Episcopal Church in Navajo Land, right? This is their cathedral.
Nice.
Yeah. Built with money from Province 1 of the Episcopal Church.
Hey, here.
Yeah, good for us. So that's Connecticut, Massachusetts, Maine, and those 2 other ones. Vermont and New Hampshire, yeah. Oh, and that other one.
Rhode Island,
Yeah,
cute place.
yes. They got a dime out of them. Oh, I'm sorry. There we are. Yeah, so still around and still vibrant. And I would really encourage you to go to the Episcopal Church, National Church website and look up the Office of Indigenous Ministries, because obviously it's not just out in the plains, and it's not in the Southwest, and it's not just in the upper Midwest. It's also in Alaska, it's also in Hawaii, it's anywhere there's tribal populations. And they do a lot of cooperative work with the Anglican Church of Canada too, which is undergoing some difficulty because our schools might have tried to turn Indian kids into white kids. Their schools on the Canadian Anglican Church tended to rip apart families. They thought maybe the best way to turn an Indian into a white Canadian is to take them away from their parents and their tribe and make them grow up in Toronto,
Didn't
someplace.
the American government do that too?
Yeah, sometimes, but that's the
Yeah,
American
I'm
government.
not talking about, Mexico now, but I think, didn't they do that with
Oh, no.
Indians out in the...
Oh, yeah. There's been all sorts of, the BIA has been responsible for a lot of crackpot programs. Yeah. And that was, what do we have here? Okay, we just have that. Anyway. No, I'd look it up. I remember my last congregation trying to get them interested in going out and building a hogan, in Navajo land. They had plans, they had everything. It was a futile effort on my part, but nevertheless I tried, because I think it would be an interesting activity. Any questions, folks? Thank you, honey.
Thank you.
I love you too, Peaches.
Thanks, Steve.
All right, that's what I have. By the way, he was serving for a time as our auxiliary, what do they call it, our assisting bishop. Did you ever know Stephen Charleston?
No.
Okay, he was a bishop of Alaska. He was the first American Indian bishop. Although when he retired, he moved to Connecticut because he was teaching at Berkeley, Yale Divinity School.
How long ago was that?
Last 15.
15 years?
Oh, you know.
Yeah. And you remember there was that period where we just had one bishop?
Yeah.
And he was helping out then, because he would do confirmations and visits, you know. They're not on the Hobart plan here, but it's too arduous for them. Imagine what it is, though. I mean, there's Hobart. He's founding a seminary. He's founding a college. He's establishing parishes all over New York. He's visiting them all the time. He's perpetually on the road. And he had time to do that.
Sounds like Vivaldi.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna run an orphanage and
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it is a busy one.
compose constantly.
Yeah, that's right. Explains his music.
Because it's beautiful.
Yeah, but also
Yeah.
has moments of freneticism.
Yeah.
It's very bipolar. The peace of God which passes all understanding be in your hearts and minds with the knowledge and love of God and of His Son, Jesus Christ our Lord, and the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be upon you and remain with you always. Amen.